Hi, Bayside Church. It's Noddy, Sharma here. Hey, I just want to say thank you so much for having me yet again. It's great to be back with you. And I want to also just honour Pastor Rob and Pastor Christy. Love you guys so much. You are such a huge blessing to the kingdom of God and to this church and to me personally. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for all that you do in furthering the gospel for the kingdom of God. And so I pray God's richest blessing on you guys as pastors and leaders at this church. Hey, Bayside, it's great to be here. And what I would love to spend the next little while talking through is a little bit about what's been on my heart around us as the church. I'm pretty sure, and I'm confident that you would all agree, that God seems to be doing some new things in our midst that none of us could probably see over the last decade, some of the things that have occurred. And especially when it came to COVID and lockdown. And I mean, I think back on that and I think, wow, incredible that not only were we not allowed to gather, but even when we were in those moments allowed to gather, we weren't allowed to sing, we weren't allowed to worship, the expression was lost. And there has definitely been some grieving in some of this, and even kind of how do we build back? I want to remind us that in these seasons throughout history, when God has done something fresh, new, something has happened in our midst, and even when there's been great suffering, the church has exploded. The church has done something greater, and it's reminded us of beyond the four walls. In fact, the four walls in a church can tend to contain us at times. And I want to remind us today that we represent the church, the body of Christ. And wherever we go, we take the church with us. We actually are instrumental in expanding the footprint and the four walls of the church. Now, when we think about that for a moment and we think about, okay, if it's going to expand and it's going to shift, it's going to change, it's going to get bigger, the question is, how do we want to turn up? How do we expand those four walls? How do we step into community, into life, into workspaces, into every place that we go? And how do we represent the church that we carry, the gospel that's within us, the Jesus that we know? How do we represent him and his bride well? So I want to talk about almost three things. I want to talk about weddings. I want to talk about fashion. And I want to talk about wine. I know, it's crazy, right? It's a very great thing that Jesus actually spoke in parables. And this parable that Jesus spoke into is in the context and found in the Gospels in three different places, both in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the gist of it goes like this, before I read it from Luke for you, the gist of it goes like this, is that the Pharisees who are well-versed in understanding the law, you know, the Judaic law of what it is you have to do in order to be able to turn up, in order to be able to be right before God. And there was a curious little question that comes to Jesus and his disciples. And they're like, hey, we notice your disciples, they're not fasting. They're not doing these things that you know, we should be doing to follow the law of what's gone before. Jesus, knowing full well that actually he's created a new day, he's in a new space, in a new time, in a new frame, knowing full well what's coming, that everything is going to be upside down, topsy-turvy. He actually responds with these three stories. He talks about one at a wedding. He said, hey, do people at a wedding, do they mourn? Do they mourn the bride and groom? Do they mourn them? No, they don't. They actually celebrate. They're there with the couple, with this beautiful celebration, the community around how they actually turn up. You know, and he's calling out the fact that, no, it's not time to mourn yet, but that time will come. Right now, I'm here in your midst. I'm doing something new. It's time to celebrate. And the second thing he talks about is garments. He says, hey, in your fashion, if your clothes tear, do you put, you know, an old piece of cloth on a new piece or a new piece on an old piece? No, you don't, because they stretch and they're different ages and they're different, and they will actually rip apart even further. They won't hold together. And then he talks about wine. He says, hey, would you put new wine in an old wineskin? No, you wouldn't. And the reason being is because the old wineskin, it's a natural leather. So it moves with the wine. And as the fermentation process happens, it stretches that goat skin, it stretches it out to its capacity, which contains the gases, and eventually that wine becomes good. If you put new wine in skin that's already stretched, guess what happens when you fill it up and those gases release? That wineskin splits. It disappears. And then he says, both the wine and the wineskin are no good. Now, in Luke's gospel, it says this, and this is a fascinating one, right? And I think I really like this that Luke calls it out. At the end of this verse, he says this. So this is Luke chapter 5, verse 37 onwards. He says, and no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the new wine would burst the wineskins, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. New wine must be stored in new wineskins. Ready for this? But no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new wine. The old is just fine, they say. It's this part that I actually want to dig into just in a moment. It's hard. It's hard to change. And when you experience something of what's gone before, and it's good, and it's been fun, and it's been incredible, you don't want to change. You know, if you're a wine connoisseur, you're looking for that old wine, the wine that's already matured, the wine that has actually gone through a process, the wine that is pleasing to the palate. You don't go from that old wine to that new wine and think it's awesome. I want to call this out for us to say we need to recognize that this is hard. Change is hard. As the process has moved, as things have changed, as God actually introduces something new in our midst right now in the 21st century, looking at everything else that's occurring, we have to realize that no one wants to change. The old was good. The old is good. It's nostalgic. It feels comfortable. It feels like a hand in a glove. It feels beautiful. No one wants to go from the thing that they knew into an uncomfortable season where there is a lot of unknowns, there is a lot of mystery, there is a lot of waiting to see what God's going to do and unfold. And sometimes it's hard to recognize. So as I said, I want to talk about weddings. I want to talk about fashion, and I want to talk about wine. So let me talk about weddings for a moment. I love weddings, and I'm sure everyone that kind of been to a wedding, it's fun. Now, I'll tell you the wedding that I really love. The wedding I love, and I'm not sure whether you've ever been to one, but I had the chance to go to a wedding that was an arranged marriage. And now that sounds like an odd thing and a very old-fashioned thing to occur. And I'm not advocating for it to say, hey, this is what has to happen. But it's interesting. When you think about studies and you look at studies when it comes to weddings, you know that the marriage rate of arranged marriages actually have a higher success rate than marriages that start in love. And even in that, when you listen to vows that are spoken at an arranged marriage, do you know what I notice? I notice that the vows that are spoken are not based on a feeling that you have for the other person, but instead, the person giving the vow has to look within of what is already in them that is something of value, something of worth that they are bringing to this moment of union. What is the best in them that they are affording to this moment? And when you listen to someone saying that, it's incredibly different to vows at a wedding where it's love. Vows at a wedding where it's love, it's very transactional almost. It's, I know you, this is what I see in you, I love that about you, and this is brilliant, and this is what it does to me, and together we're better than just, separately, and I love how you make me feel, and I want that for the rest of my life. Arranged marriages, when you have to look within you and there is nothing that's bringing that sense of real connection to this other person that's apparent, you have to actually say, I actually don't know you, but I know me. And this is what I bring to the table. And this is how I'm going to turn up. This is how I'm going to be. I'm going to be loving. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to look out for you. I'm going to embrace you in your pain. I'm going to walk with you in life. I'm going to step closer and closer. I'm going to choose you. There is something incredibly powerful about that posture of it not being based on a transaction, but it's based on a gift. It's based on recognizing what you have within and choosing something that you've got inside of you that you're offering to another person. Now, I don't think there's any accident that Jesus uses a wedding as a great example. It's a huge celebration. It's amazing. And there is this sense going on in a wedding that actually the two people joining, they are recognizing something within that they're offering back to the other person, back to the community. What if what Jesus is calling us to in this season is not based on the old of what we were in love with, but is actually more based on what's going on already inside of us as followers of Jesus that we have that we can offer back to the world? What do we have that we can turn up with? What do we have that we can say, hey, we will be compassionate, we will be kind, we will be loving, we will step into your pain, we will be here for the long haul, we will pay attention to you, we will see you, we will hear you, we will walk with you, we will help you. That is based on a gift that we bring that's out of an overflow of what God is already instilling in our lives versus we invite you to join us because we like you. I mean, those two postures are very different. My challenge to us as followers of Jesus is may we be his bride that is actually looking internally at what we have to offer in this relationship with the world, with our community and with our God, than we are about being transactional in the way in which we engage because it feels good for ourselves. It feels comfortable. All right, let me talk about fashion for a moment. Garments. I am not a fashion guru by a long shot, not a fashion guru. But I do notice things that crop up through and over time. And when you go back and you look at some of the 80s fashion that was going on, I'm horrified when I see some photos. When you look at some of the 90s, you kind of look at it. When you see some of the things that came out, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, also, I don't even recognize some of those things. And you notice that it's all seasonal. It all happens. It all changes. Now, here is the thing when it comes to fashion, right? Have you ever noticed that whatever the era that you were in, your fashion kind of stands still in that space? And that's it. You kind of find a look. It's based on whatever the fashion was at the time when it was important to be fashionable. And that's your look, and that's kind of how it stays. Every now and then you can try and reinvent yourself. Every now and then you can try and embrace, be that person who embraces new fashions, new things. But sometimes if you're like me and you've got lots of grey in your beard, I would look ridiculous wearing what, 14, 15-year-olds are finding fashionable today. And why? It's because I've already found my space. I've already found my identity. I don't need to try and keep up with it. It's also really simple in that space. When you see another fashion coming in as it's moving, to actually judge it really quickly. I see things coming in, I'm like, oh, that looks ridiculous. But to the person of the day where that's actually an important focus for them, that may not look ridiculous. That actually may look like something that's really acceptable and helps them feel like they can belong. And really what I'm calling out here is I'm calling out to say, as things move, as things change, as things come in and out of season, as things come in and out of trends, it's important that we as people, especially strong in our identity of understanding where we are at this moment in time, are not quick to judge what something may look like as it's coming for us. In actual fact, the best posture we can take is with almost open hands to embrace things and allow it to just be. Because we know that fads, that things that come in and out of season change. And that's okay. It comes and it goes. New seasons start and end every time. There is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end. What I want us to do is start to think about as the church, instead of getting so caught up in maybe what things look like, that we would actually recognize that even in this new season, even in these things of change that's there, we can relax, we can breathe out, we can be okay with the fact that things are moving. Thirdly, wineskins. Wineskins are a fascinating science. And I want to say this about wine. Before when I said anyone who's a wine connoisseur can actually think about the old wine that's coming and think it's really good, new wine's not so good, I want to say this. Winemakers are incredible at making sure that they are constantly creating space for the new. Why? Because if all you do is drink old wine or only wait for the makers of the past, then you will have no new or no old stock coming into the future. Why is this important? It's important to think about the church. It's important to think about the context of now. It's important to think about changes. It's important to think about how we actually turn up in this world. Because in actual fact, what we need to continually do in our walk with Jesus is think about the new. Think about how we engage the new. If we don't have new wine coming, there'll be nothing to enjoy in the future. I have this burning sense that our response in this season, in what seems like a topsy-turvy, upside-down world, in what seems like the next generation is not interested in or even trusting institutional church organizations, large organizations even, in this season, more now than ever before, we need to stop, lean in, pay attention, and be relational to the next generation, not in a patronizing way, not in a let me minister to you, but instead let me minister with you. Let me actually embrace your pain. Let me pull you in much closer. Why? Because the new has to come. Otherwise, the old will slowly disappear. I think God's renewal for the church relies upon this uncomfortable space of constantly allowing new to come in. May our cellars be filled with this broad spectrum of old and new, knowing the right time for it to actually come to fruition. You know, I get this, that this is hard and it is difficult. And I want to just stay in this whole wedding theme for a moment. You know, sometimes what we do and what we need to recognize is that as the church, we're influenced by some signaling that occurs. And in fact, we look for it. We look for that signaling to kind of think, this is okay. This is good in my faith. This is what we do. This is what the church looks like. And sometimes we fail to recognize that there's probably more things at play and more opportunity to embrace stuff within the church landscape that may not match our signaling. You know, a few years back, my cousin was overseas and was getting married to a lady from another country and invited a bunch of us to go to the wedding. I didn't get to go, but my sister actually went and she took some friends of hers as well. And she went along to this wedding and it was this beautiful wedding. Now, it wasn't just like an hour ceremony and then a reception. It went for like 3 or 4 days. It had full dress ups. It was colorful. It was beautiful. It had henna everywhere. It was stunning. But she took some people, her friends of hers from here, and the reflection they all had when they came back was, we didn't even recognize it was a wedding. It was wonderful. It was beautiful. It was extraordinary, but it's not what we experience. It's not the norm. And here's the thing. A wedding is a perfect example to think about this. When we go to a wedding in our context, we almost immediately know who the bride is because there's a dress that's usually white that actually symbolizes something. There's a groomsman who's dressed quite nicely. There's specific phrases and words that whoever is conducting the wedding will say. There is things where we invite people to stand and sit and respond at particular times. These are all things that we have seen and are very aware of. And actually what it does is it signals to us, you are at a wedding. And so you conjure up all the appropriate things that you have that go on to say that was a beautiful celebration. But here's what I want to call out. A wedding in a different culture, a wedding on the other side of the world, looks vastly different to the weddings that we actually may have here in Australia. And that's okay. It doesn't cease to be a wedding. It actually is just done differently with this beautiful, rich culture that's actually been pressed in. I want to say to us that even on this level of understanding the new day for the church, as we continue to actually think about how we turn up in society and how God's doing something new in our midst, we need to relax in the knowledge that it may not look like we think it does right now, but it doesn't make it that God isn't at work and isn't doing something new in our midst. The question is, can we relax in ourselves enough to embrace it, to allow it to be, and to trust that God is moving something in a particular way for such a time as this? I want to kind of land us with this. For the last few hundred years, when you think about how the church has turned up in society, the role that it's played, it's had a significant role. It's been incredible. It's shaped a lot of what we've seen in terms of, even science, education, healthcare system, governance. A lot of these things are all shaped by this biblical worldview that the new heaven is designed to exist here on earth, and that as Jesus comes, he heralds this and brings it with him. It's designed for us to feel like we can actually take life in all its abundance, in all its glory, and give it as a gift and almost allow people to have access to it all around the globe. That has been a beautiful thing, and I want to see that continue. There has been something, though, that has slipped in over the last little while, I would say the last few decades, has slipped in that's very different in the way in which we have turned up. And if we think about how we're designed to turn up, and if we think about what it has been historically, this idea of justice has been this thing that's stirred into us. Now, when I say the word justice, what immediately pops into your mind? Is it justice? Is it a person that's actually standing behind a bench in a courtroom who's banging the gavel and saying it's justice? I'm hearing the court case, I'm hearing what's happened, and because of what you've done, this is justice? Is it someone who is actually saying, hey, I'm seeing an injustice in the world where there is poverty, where there is pain, strickenness, and I want to balance these scales? I mean, all of these things, I think, are powerful images. but I want to almost be a little bit provocative here. I want to suggest to you that actually the church doesn't need to be so justice orientated. It doesn't. And I'm sure you're probably thinking to yourself right now, Noddy, what are you talking about? Well, let me explain. If our picture of justice is more like that judge banging the table and saying, hey, you've done this is what you deserve, that is the total counter opposite of what Jesus says to us. Jesus says, hey, I know what you've done. I'm not banging the gavel. I'm just offering you forgiveness. I've already paid that price. And go and do that for others. In other words, go and act unjustly. Because if justice looks like the fact that you pay the price for what it is you've done, grace actually calls us to say, be kind, be loving, be forgiving, turn up in those spaces where it doesn't make sense. And now don't hear me wrong. There are definitely some issues in this world that we do. We need that harsh placard kind of thing in place to say this is justice. I mean, exploitation of kids is one of them for me. Like, we need loud voices banging on tables and actually calling governments and people to account for stuff. But I think on the whole, in general society right now, as we think about what the landscape across Australia and the globe looks like, and think about Gen Z coming into it with all sorts of things going on, what they actually need is not necessarily justice, but kindness, love, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, embracing. These are the things. This is the posture. This is a hallmark of what the church should look like as we turn up, as we actually reinvent ourselves and think about what Jesus is inviting us to. When I think about this for a moment, I think, and we cannot go past the Micah 6:8. I can almost hear you saying, Noddy, what about Micah 6:8, where it says, what does the Lord require of you? He requires to act justly, to love mercy and walk humbly with your God. Some translations actually even retranslate, they don't even use the word justice. They actually say that you would act kindly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. What I want to say is simply this. I actually think the order that these things appear matters. And we read it in the first three and we think to ourselves, okay, the first thing in some of these things is justice. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do justice first, right the scales, correct the wrongs, do all these things, make sure that we're just. And then we're going to, have some mercy, some love, kindness in there, and then we'll walk humbly with God. I want to say to us as the church that in this season, it's actually reversed, that we have to start with walking humbly with God. Walking humbly with God allows us to actually have the outpouring of that which God has done in us and has done for us. The good news of the gospel be an expression of how the church engages with humanity. It is understanding that we have been designed to walk humbly with him first, holding his hand. And the gifts that he gives us, the grace that he pours into our lives, the way that he almost unjustly deals with us because he keeps forgiving us, keeps embracing us, keeps bringing us in, reminds us of that's how we've been designed to turn up with humanity today. That's how we've been designed to turn up in our workplaces today. That's what we've been designed to do in community, in our families, in our homes, to actually walk humbly with him. We only get that when we never let go of his hand, when we understand that his attributes pour in and through us in such a way that it enables us to actually give this as a gift to others. I think about my little boy. He's only 10 and he's still at that age where he loves walking. And when we walk, he holds my hand, right? And often as we're walking, regardless whether it's too cold, too hot, his little hands are sweaty, he doesn't care. He will slip his hand into mine. And I love it. I'll tell you why, because what I realize as I'm walking with him is that this amazing thing happens. He actually points my attention to certain things that are important to him, and he gives me permission to be able to keep speaking into his life. And I have this very real realization that as he walks holding my hand, he is an extension of me. My friends, I want to say that as we walk with Jesus, and we're invited to walk humbly with him holding his hand, we get this very real privilege to be able to draw his attention to things that are bothering us in this world. But we also have this incredible privilege to actually act as an extension of our Father in heaven. We get to act as an extension of God back to a broken world. When we think about how we want to turn up in this next season, as we think about the church moving forward, as we think about the shape we take, as we think about the fact that we don't like change, I want to say this to us. Let's be an extension of good news. Let's be an extension of Jesus, the one who paid it all for us, the one who actually has given us grace, the one who laid down his life and poured it out for the many. Let's be an extension of that. We do that by hanging onto his hand, not letting go, and recognizing that we represent him in every space we go. Let's fall in love with our function, and let's open our hands to the form. May God bless you guys as you continue to serve. I pray that as we embrace this next season, you would continue to turn up in such a way that shows God's grace, his kindness, his love, and it would all be done through hanging onto his hand, walking with him on a daily basis, and letting the truth of what it is that he's pouring into your life be an expression from your lips, your hands, and your feet, and your heart as you engage with the world around you. God bless you.